Good morning and welcome to a special meeting of the Glendale City Council being called to order at 9:11 a.m. Madam Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Yes, council members Asatryan.
Here.
Divine.
Here.
Kasakian.
Here.
Ajarian.
Here.
Mayor Brotman.
Here. And may we have your report, please?
The agenda for the Tuesday, April 25th, 2023 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, April 20th, 2023 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And your
The agenda
first item? Yeah.
Finance regarding study session number 1, fiscal year 2022 to 2023 work plan update, fiscal year 2022-2023 general fund projection, fiscal year 2023-2024 general fund proposed budget, and general fund 5-year forecast.
Thank you. And Mr. Galanian.
Yes, good morning, Mayor Brotman, members of the City Council. Thank you for being here this morning and participating in today's session. This is an exciting time of the year as we kick off our budget review season. And there's a lot of material and a great deal of data to cover. Hence, we have scheduled 6 budget study sessions before the adoption that I hope will be informative, will generate meaningful discussions, meet your expectations, and in the process provide answers to your questions. Before we get to the presentation, I wanted to take this opportunity to commend our budget team, as well as the departments and their budget liaisons, all of whom are here. They've put a lot of hard work, long hours, starting, as a matter of fact, back in December. So it's been in the works for 5 months already in preparation of this budget study session and the ensuing ones, and hoping that we will, like I said, this will be informative and meet your expectations, and I thank you all for that. Over the last couple of years, we have shifted towards priority-based budgeting, as you know, and using council's established and adopted priority focus areas. And before we get into the presentation on the budget, I wanted to provide an opportunity to get you a progress report on the current work plan that was established and adopted last year, and then I'll turn it over to our finance department. Go back. So on the agenda for today, for fiscal year 22-23, it's the current fiscal year. Like I mentioned, it'll be, I'll provide an update on the work plan as promised, and then we'll cover the general fund year-end projection. And for next fiscal year 23-24, Mr. Bradford will cover the general fund 5-year forecast, the proposed general fund budget, as well as the budget calendar. So the current work plan, as the 4 of you at least may recall, as part of the process that council went through, established for priority focus areas, and as a result, departments went to work and generated a list of 55 projects that was presented to council and was adopted, with a number of you asking the question of whether we have the capacity or staff have the capacity to complete or at least work on these 55 projects, and the response was yes, an overwhelming yes. As you can imagine, 55 projects is a long list, and although there are only, on this graph, only 7 departments are shown as having the primary responsibility of tackling these projects, there are also other departments that provided support services, for example, HR, IT, finance, etc. Of the 55 projects, I'll go from left to right. We have put 2 on hold, and those are, the first one is to begin construction of Artsakh Avenue Improvement Project. If you recall, we brought a report back. Council wanted to have the design revisited, and staff went back and worked with the consultant. They have provided a proposal, which quite frankly is fairly expensive. I will share that with council, and we'll seek later on, and we will seek direction moving forward for that project. The other one is the seismic retrofit of fire stations 23 and 27. We've put that on hold currently. The seismic design, retrofit design work is complete for those two fire stations, but the Public Works and Fire Department team are working on improving the functionality of these two fire stations, and that's in the works. We terminated two projects, namely the virtual power plant with the Sunrun, and as you know, that was terminated by their election, but staff is working on a replacement project, and in the next few months or so, we'll bring a report back. And the second one that was terminated was from the fire department. It was to create a fuel crew to mitigate the threat of wildfire around power lines. That was predicated on receiving a grant. Staff did apply for a grant. Unfortunately, we're not successful, so we have terminated that effort. Now, of the other 51 projects, staff have started on 9 and completed at least, there are 4 projects that have been completed at least 25%, which means essentially if the project is completed, the percentage between 25 and 49, it goes on this column. And at least 50%, it's a remarkable 20 projects have that are in that category, which means projects that have a completion of 50% to 99%. And 18 are 100% complete. That represents a 33% of the total number of projects, or 1/3. So putting those two last columns together, it's almost 70% of the list of 55 projects that are near completion or completed. And that's remarkable, and I wanted to give a shout out to all the departments that have a hand in completing these 38 projects, as well as the rest that are in the works. As a refresher, for fiscal year 22-23, our current fiscal year, Council established priorities were infrastructure, environmental stewardship, housing, as well as mobility, connectivity, and safety. For infrastructure, I will not, in the interest of time, go through all of these projects, but needless to say, at least 5 have been 100% complete, and another 8 at least 50%, or between 50 and 99%. Environmental stewardship, again, another 5 projects, 100% complete, and there are other 3 between 50 and 99%. Next. Housing, you all remember this council and the previous councils have embarked on an unprecedented number of affordable housing units, 4 different projects, over 530 or 40 affordable housing units. 5 of the line item projects in the work plan have been completed 100%, another 4 between 50 and 99%. Mobility, connectivity, and safety, 3 projects 100% complete, another 5 between 50 and 99%. So that represents the current year fiscal priorities established by council. Now, as you recall, let me cover some of the highlights of the projects in each priority focus area. I've only picked 2, but there are, as you know, a number of them. Staff have been able to complete phase 1 of 3 phases of closed-circuit TV inspection of our sanitary sewer collection system, which was a important project for this council. We have been able to retain the consultant to prepare the plans and specs for the Central Park Improvement Project in coordination with Armenian American Museum. The housing, one of the line items was to seek tax credit funding and begin construction of the affordable housing project at 515 Pioneer, and that is 100% complete. You went to the groundbreaking a couple of months ago, and we are one of the cities that have been able, thanks to the housing and CDD staff, the planning and CDD staff, that we have submitted the housing element to HCD, and council adopted it. As far as mobility, we've implemented phase 1 of the citywide pedestrian safety plan. As a matter of fact, our community development department received an award from American Planning Association, LA chapter, for this pedestrian safety plan, and they are seeking grants to be able to implement the other phases. Permanent slow streets, per council's direction, we've implemented a pilot program, installed a number of these signs throughout the city, evaluating the effectiveness of this program this month and next month, and we'll bring a report back to council for further direction. Sustainability, environmental stewardship. One of the items was to develop REACH codes. This would be above and beyond the California Energy Code, for electrification of new building construction. The staff, with the assistance from the consultant they hired, are in the process of drafting the ordinance to come back to council. And the last highlighted project is to complete the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. As you recall, this is an 18-month project that started in January of this year per council's direction.
Mr. Galanian?
Yes.
If we could go back. When you say complete the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, we haven't formally started it.
Well, we received direction from council, and we are in the process of completing it, but the line item was to take it off the ground and move forward with it. But if you like some additional information, Mr. Jones is available to provide a more detailed status on that effort.
I mean, I don't think we need to do that now, but it seems to me it should be initiate the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, because it's still a long process.
Correct.
And complete sounds to me like it's complete. It's adopted, which obviously is not going to happen for a good year.
Right,
So
I believe complete the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, you are correct, it hasn't been completed. The percentage, I believe, is just below maybe 25 to 50%. So it's a long process, multi-year, and you will see it as being carried over to future years.
Okay. And just another thing is, it would be helpful to provide the full list to all of us. I think you have in the past, but the full list of projects. You're identifying some of the key ones and giving us how many are in each bucket. But
Yes.
if you could present us, and I think the public would also be interested in seeing the complete list.
Most definitely, Mr. Mayor. We have in the past shared the dashboard that Greg Cascio had put together that updates it on a regular basis for your reference, but we can definitely share it with the public.
Okay, and I also want to just say for my colleagues, any questions you have as we go, please feel free to ask. I think it's better than waiting till the end. And Councilmember Satriani,
sorry.
looked like you had some.
If you can go back to the first slide with the 55 projects. I think last time you guys had brought this report, I had requested that we have a breakdown of both the 55 projects and all the additional items that council had requested. So we would be able to, during this process, see if we actually were in line with the priorities that the council set, or did we gear off and go in a different direction? So I think it would be helpful if at another session, you can bring that back.
Yes, very good question, Councilmember Sarkian. Actually, as a matter of fact, I was going to cover the next fiscal year's work plan that was discussed March 21st, I believe. We had a day-long meeting, workshop for council. And as part of that, we will bring it to council, I believe, next budget study session for your review and final review and adoption, at which point we'll also go over the council request based on our new format and where they fall within those 4 areas of council's priorities.
So that's for the future.
Correct.
I'm talking about.
We can certainly provide that. We hadn't planned on including that in a study session, but if it's council's desire, we can always add it to one of the study sessions.
I would like to see that. I don't know how my colleagues feel about that, but it's something that I had requested last time you brought this forward.
Maybe, yeah, could you explain?
Sure,
I
so-
didn't quite understand.
He has 55 projects listed here, but the council has requested much more than 55 in the last year. So I'd like to see a full picture of how many projects we actually requested from staff during this fiscal year, and if they actually fell into the categories that the council had found priorities.
So if I may, Councilmember Sarkian is referring to the council request list and asking that we identify whether each of those requests fall within any of these 4 area of priorities for council.
Okay.
And
So
we can do that fairly
maybe you
easily.
can, yeah, just like a slide on that.
Yeah, we
that
can
you could
add it
fold.
to next budget study session.
Okay.
So we just went over the 22-23 council priorities and covered the highlights. One more. Okay. 23-24, I briefly mentioned that next budget study session will bring this forward. And 4 priority focus areas: financial sustainability, economic development, operational efficiency, and last but not least, it's the similar to the previous year's priority is mobility, traffic, and pedestrian safety. Although this was council's chosen 4 priorities, just wanted to emphasize that just because your previous priorities, for example, environmental stewardship, housing, infrastructure, didn't make this year's list, it doesn't mean that we will not continue our efforts and bring forward projects to meet those needs in the community. So that will be an ongoing process, and some of those items and projects will get carried over to the next fiscal year or the next couple of fiscal years till their completion. And we will, again, bring this back in the next budget study session for discussion and hopefully adoption so that we can move forward. All the departments are working on putting together, as was the case last year, a list of items to go into the work plan for your consideration, adjustment, deletion, or there are projects that you believe need to be added to the list. So we'll have that conversation next, what's the date?
Yeah, so just so I'm clear, let's say that there's a topic that doesn't fit into those priorities. What does that mean? Does that mean it is a lesser priority and that another proposal or idea that fits into one of these categories has priority over it? Or we make an exception and we move forward with it? So I know we voted on these. I remember the big vote we had, and, you know, there were some unhappy people, different priorities didn't make the top 4. But, you know, what does that mean? Let's say I have a, let's say there's a quality of life issue that I can't really detail, but let's just say this vague quality of life issue. It doesn't really fit neatly into any of those categories. Does that mean that an economic development goal would have priority over a quality of life goal? Because we didn't put quality of life in that top 4 tiers.
Yeah, very good question, Councilmember Najarian. So, as you know, as part of that workshop, council came up with a new process for asking for items that are not included as part of your priority. And as part of that process, any council member can request a project, a program, and then we put it on the agenda as new business. The council will have the other council members brief discussion around that item, ask the pertinent questions, and then once we get direction from council, then we'll move forward with what's necessary to address that request. So we have a list of your chosen priorities voted on. We will have a work plan based on these priorities. You will adopt that, but again, it doesn't mean that if there is a quality of life, essential services, something that a council member is interested in, will not get priority. We will work on it as much as we can with the resources that we have. But now we have a new process in place.
But that off-the-board concept or suggestion would still be, okay, so let's say there's 2 ideas that come forward. One is a quality of life issue. One is let's say that there's a operational efficiency concept that are being proposed. Wouldn't we have to vote also on that idea and that priority that fits into the operational efficiency? That doesn't get a pass automatic, right? So in each one of those, one that's on the board, one that's off the board, still has to come before council and move forward. So are you saying these are just like general aspirational goals that aren't exclusive of any other idea or proposal that council brings, but just is a message as to where the council at that time, when was it, November? When did we do that?
March.
March. At that snapshot in time, reflected. So let's say the mayor comes up with an environmental issue that, I know that wasn't one of the, that didn't make our top 4, but that's still available and in the running for action by council and moving forward, despite it not being up there. I couldn't say, wait a minute, that's not, environmental stewardship isn't on here.
Right.
Buzz off. It's still, we would deal with it as we would any other idea.
That is correct, Councilmember Najarian. So when we bring the work plan items to council next
May 2nd.
May 2nd budget study session, right, you will adopt that work plan, and that's based on the resources we have. Now, if a request comes in, and I'm pretty sure there will be requests, right, outside these 4 priority areas, then we need to have that frank conversation. If we get direction from majority of council to move forward, then we'll have to reevaluate. Do we need to drop any of the work plan items, the projects, to be able to fit your requested item? Or can we, based on our resources, accommodate your request in addition to what's been adopted, what will hopefully be adopted on May 2nd?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I just want to clarify, when we had the meeting, the options and categories that we had on there for us to pick from were limited. And I know that I, for one, had requested that some of the things that we talked about and as a council agreed on, made sure that it falls into one of these categories. I thought you guys were gonna look into changing the names or creating new buckets that really reflected what we were talking about. So for example, operational efficiency. I mean, I marked that with the understanding, because for me, community engagement and outreach was part of that bucket, but it didn't really fall in, when you read this title, it doesn't fall into that.
And yeah, Councilmember Satrian, we will have that conversation on May 2nd. We have a number of people have taken, we're taking copious notes, and we will try to, and we've shared that with the department heads, and we will try to, as best as we can, fit those items into these categories or these buckets. And if we're not able to, we will share that list with you, and we'll have a conversation around, do we need to change the title to better fit these items that we couldn't fit in the bucket, or can those items wait, or can those items come back separately as part of this additional process that Councilmember Najarian was talking about. So we'll have that entire list that every council member had a part in generating, and we'll share that with you, and we'll take it from there. So with that, I'm sorry.
Sorry, before we finish on this, because, you know, I know we had our workshop, and that was obviously not on camera, and it was, you know, there was very little public participation. I think there were 2 members of the public there. And we, you know, kicked around these categories, and we voted. But I thought it was going to come back to a regular council meeting to kind of finalize that, because some of these categories, like Councilmember Satrian's saying, you know, they mean different things to different people. You know, I expressed concern about, you know, not specifically calling out sustainability or housing. I thought we were going to have an opportunity to kind of bring that into a formal vote and a kind of a final definition of what these categories mean. Are we not planning to do that?
Mr. Mayor, we can do that. But as you noted, we'll have to bring it to a regular council meeting to get direction. But we have to do that fairly quickly. My understanding, my recollection was, and it was mentioned a couple of times this morning, council voted on these 4 items. And the majority of council votes we took as direction. But again, it's up to this council if they want to revisit the title of these buckets, want to change them. But we are up against some tight deadlines, because we use this as a roadmap, like I mentioned, because we've shifted towards priority-based budgeting. We'd like to use your priority areas to set the stage for next year's budget and fiscal projects that get completed in that fiscal year. But again, if this council's direction, we can certainly have that discussion at a regular meeting.
Okay, Councilmember Devine?
Yeah, I just want to say that we all did vote on these, and I think as the process continues, that we can go into the weeds into each of these priorities, and they can be explained, and if we want something to be put into the priorities, we can do that. And I think that would be the best, in my opinion, the best way to do this, and not try to tackle that by redoing the whole process.
I mean, yeah, I wasn't thinking of redoing the process. I was thinking of just maybe being a little clearer on what we mean by these things, how we address some of the things that didn't get on there, like housing, sustainability. Obviously, those are, we said, you know, we're going to continue with those things, but I think Councilmember Najarian raised a good point. It's, you know, if somebody comes up with something, or if there's, you know, you said that we can have that process, you know, or a council member can propose something, we can get a vote of 3. It goes into the queue, but the question is, where is it in the queue, and how much priority does staff, with its limited resources, put on that versus something else? Those are important questions. And, you know, and we did, I mean, that workshop, it was a fairly quick, you know, discussion and decision. It felt kind of rushed, and it felt like we didn't have between the time when we were putting stickers on the board and finalizing it, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion on something that's this important, so I don't know, I don't have an answer for what we do, but if there's some way, maybe just on, next week's study session, we come and maybe drill a little bit into these questions, the question of, what do these mean? And the question of, how do we deal with something, let's say I want to, revisit the virtual power plant. I want to, us to look at going back out and trying to recreate that. Does that then go, yes, we'll do that, but we're going to do everything else first? And so that's, I think we need to be more clear on that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Mayor, City Council, I understand, and we can certainly have that discussion. You have the prerogative to change the title of, I shouldn't say change, adjust the title of these 4 priority buckets. However, I caution you, and I'm concerned about adding more priorities, because these priorities will have to be manageable. We cannot have, 6, 7, 8 priorities, and we can't capture everything. Again, just because a 2 or 3 of previous year priority buckets didn't make it to this year, doesn't mean that we're going to ignore them. There are, as you saw, 55 projects. Only 1/3 of them have been completed, and those work plan items were reviewed and adopted by council, and council said, move forward with these, and those are my priorities for this year, but some of them are multi-year, right? And if the example you gave, you give direction per our new process, you give direction to council to move forward and find a replacement project for a virtual power plant, we definitely will evaluate it with the resources we have, the work plan that you've adopted. Again, we may be able to accommodate that. We'll come back with a report, and that report will be clear to say, with current resources, we have to drop one of these work plan items to be able to accommodate your request, or no, we can accommodate it, and here's the schedule for it, and here's the path moving forward. We can have all that discussion again at the, I recommend on the May 2nd budget study session, let's have those discussion. If after that you still feel like it needs to be part of a regular meeting with public input, that's going to take time, but I would recommend to have that, what we've put on place for May 2nd, and see where it takes us.
Okay, let's see. But these are all, I think these are good questions,
Yeah,
and we're
they're
a little bit
great
fuzzy on how
questions.
it works.
Absolutely, great
And I
questions.
can think of, multiple examples of things.
Sure.
Some things that actually were requested and were seconded, and I think are on the list, but staff hasn't yet begun working on them. For example, we talked about the REACH codes for major remodels. When we approved the REACH codes, we also, in that motion, said we were going to move on immediately and look at how we treat major remodels. So that, but staff hasn't begun that. So now what happens with that? Does that now go to the back of the line? Or, these are the things, I don't know that you need to answer them now, but these are the things I think we have to all kind of agree on how that's going to work.
Yeah, most definitely, and on May 2nd, we'll also provide that list Councilmember Sartran asked for with the priority buckets, but we didn't have this new process in place. On several occasions, this council discussed it. How do we process this additional request from individual council members? But moving forward with this new process in place, we will have a more robust conversation, and my hope is that a council member will ask, as part of that conversation, well, Mr. City Manager, do we have the resources to complete this? That's going to be part of the new business agenda conversation. So I should be able to give you, with some degree of certainty, whether we can proceed with any of these requested items, or we have to make adjustments on the work plan that you will adopt.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
With that, I know I hijacked a lot of your time, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Bradford to walk us through the 2023 general fund year-end projection.
Thank you, Mr. Galanian. Good morning, Mayor Bromden, members of the council. I will go ahead and cover the fiscal year 22-23 general fund year-end projection. Our initial revenue estimate for sales tax up 3.3 million, and we had a total revenue estimate in the general fund of 265.2 million. Fast forward through today, I'm pleased to announce that our sales tax continued to hold strong through the holiday season. Once again exceeded our forecasts. That, along with several other revenue categories, we are forecasting an additional 10.9 million in revenues in the general fund for a total of 276.2 million, which is a 4.1% increase. In regards to sales tax, we again outpaced the county and state. We saw a year-over-year increase of 6.4% versus 4% for the county and 4.7% for the state. We were paced once again. We had very strong performance in auto sales, service stations. It's driven by the cost of fuel, casual dining, and electronics and appliance stores were big supporters to our sales tax. Based on the data we have, we are proposing to revise our revenue estimate upward of another $5.4 million. Utility users tax is the other significant revision to our revenue estimate. We are increasing that 2.5 million. And this is primarily a function of the increase in natural gas prices, and we've seen a corresponding increase in our utility users tax. Occupancy tax, or hotel tax as it's commonly referred to, we've also seen a strong performance, and we're revising this category up 600,000. So all told, an increase of 10.9 million in our revenue estimates. On the expenditure side, we have a revised budget of 212.6 million for our salary and benefits. We do believe we will come in under budget at 211 million. That would be a savings of 1.6 million on our salary and benefits. And this is in addition to the 5.5 million in general fund vacancies that we've already factored into our forecast. On the maintenance and operations side in the general fund, and this is our non-labor costs, if you will, contains a variety of things in our M&O budget, such as contractual services, utilities, office supplies, rent, insurance, our cost for IT. We have a revised budget of 78.3 million, and we do expect a budget savings of $2.9 million. So between the two categories on the previous slide, we do anticipate a budget savings of about $4.5 million, which is about 1.5% of our total budget. So based on our revised revenue projections and our expenditures, we anticipate having a budget surplus in 22-23 of $7.8 million. We are using another allotment of our ARPA funding. If you recall, we received a total of $43 million. We've already committed $5 million as part of fiscal year 21-22. We're using $18 million in 22-23, and we'll use the final allotment of $20.4 million, which I'll speak to in a couple of slides. With that surplus, we are proposing to move it to one of our internal service funds, in this case, our fleet management fund. This fund was developed over a decade ago, and it consolidates all of our maintenance costs for the city's rolling stock and heavy equipment, but also pays for the purchase of all of our vehicles, particularly in the general fund and most notably for public safety, our fire and police vehicles. Over the years, as we've attempted to balance the general fund budget year after year, quite frankly, we've underfunded this operation, as simultaneously we've explored a multitude of options to control costs, whether that's extending the life of the equipment, looking at leasing, looking at buying cheaper vehicles, and certainly we've gone through fleet reduction at that point. At this point, we can no longer continue to do that, as the fleet operation is in need of additional funding, particularly to continue to replace and maintain our public safety fleet.
I have a question.
Yes.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, Jason. I just want to make sure that some of this funding for fleet management is going towards the transition to electric vehicles and electric fleet.
Councilmember
Cars.
Devine, members of the council, this will not, this funding won't pay for the entire electrification of our fleet, but however, as vehicles come up for replacement, we do go through that analysis to see which ones we can replace with electric vehicles. I don't know if Mr. Galian has anything to add to that.
That is true, Councilmember Devine. The electrification plan that council directed staff to implement has a hefty price tag. It's a multi-year program as we are seeking grants, and there are grants out there. If you recall, one for electrifying our Beeline buses came to council for acceptance. But as Mr. Bradford mentioned, as we go through the replacement schedule for those vehicle and equipment, when the replacement equipment is commercially available in electric format, we definitely look into it and have purchased it, and we will continue to replace our gas-powered equipment with what's available in the market.
So we are, as such, we are proposing to transfer the 22-23 surplus of 7.8 million to our fleet management fund. This is an updated look at where we think 22-23 will end, what the ending fund balance will look like. It'll basically be where we started the year at 92.7 million, and 31.5% is our reserve percentage.
I want to ask a question. So back to the last slide, to the fleet management fund. So, why this fund and not, I'm sure we've underfunded a lot of funds. We've also talked about so many other things, like sticking some more money aside for parks or whatever. I mean, I could come up with a list of like 20 items. So why this fund and not something else?
Mayor Brotman, members of the council, we, Mr. Tuktalian and I worked very closely on this, and this is frankly at the highest priority, this particular fund in need of funding. We do recognize there are other challenges, and when I get into the 5-year forecast, we will be setting aside additional funding for other needs, but quite frankly, this one was at the top of the list as far as priorities.
And Mayor Brotman, members of the council, to add to what Mr. Bradford mentioned, these are, as you can imagine, critical pieces of equipment that enable our operational departments to function. And over the last few years, we have eliminated a large number of vehicles and equipment. Mr. Tuktalian and Mr. Bradford have researched and looked on several occasions at leasing equipment as opposed to purchase. And that's at a point that is key and critical that we fund this, account this fund to be able to replace these pieces of equipment and vehicles. Otherwise, it's going to negatively impact the operations, and in some cases, they may not be able to conduct what the services they provide. So that's why this came up to the list of all other priorities. But again, the rest of the funds, staff has looked at it, we've looked at it, and we know their situation, and we have a plan moving forward.
Councilmember Rosati.
And explain to me, once we go through this process, if we are to authorize this expenditure, how long will that be good for again?
The plan is, I don't know how many pieces of equipment.
Would you like me to respond?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Tuktalian.
Mayor Brown, members of the council, I think that it's important to make two distinct points. The reason why both the city manager and the finance director have mentioned that this is of a critical juncture is because this fund is the fund that we've been relying upon pretty heavily over the last several years to close previous funding gaps. So much so that we've put it in a position where if we don't fund it this year, the fund goes into the negative. Going into the negative essentially means that we are going to continue to defer purchases that are critical, and it's going to take that much more in future years to try to dig ourselves out of that hole. that this $7.8 million merely keeps us solvent for another year. And then moving forward, I believe that in our 5-year forecast, we have a little over $2 million a year to keep that fund balanced. The second piece of information that I think is very critical to this conversation is the piece about electrification. Specifically, when council adopted the electrification plan for 2035, it did so understanding that there was $100+ million price tag associated with that. These current rates, as we have them, do not account for the need to build in additional capacity for future purchases of the infrastructure and the equipment. So the 7.8 and the $2 million moving forward is our status quo. In future years, as we develop a new rate study, those numbers are going to get slightly larger, which goes back to my earlier comment about if we don't do this, the need or our ability to dig ourselves out of a deeper hole is only going to get worse. Does that make sense?
Does that answer your question,
It
Councilman?
answers it partially. So, I mean, my understanding is, and correct me if I don't follow you, but we're simply trying to keep the fund, to keep enough money in the fund to keep our operations where they are, which is, I understand the need for it. It's also concerning. But I also want to know, and perhaps you've already looked into this, right? But when we're talking about fleet management, that's all the vehicles across the organization, including vehicles that are allowed to be take-home vehicles by individuals. How many, have you looked into limiting the use of take-home vehicles for non-essential use?
Yes, we have. Specifically, I will say that the take-home vehicles, for the most part, are in the public safety arena, many of them in the police department, limited to captains, lieutenants, the police chief, and a handful of sergeants. And the reason for that, as well as the motors. The motorcycles, that's actually something that was negotiated into the MOUs and approved by council previously. The rest of it was a departmental decision based on operational necessity, and oftentimes it's because when there is a callback, those vehicles are all outfitted with lights and sirens, and we have the police chief who can speak to it, but those are typically the officers who are going to be responding on a day off or in the evening, driving in Code 3 on the freeways. So that's part of the reason, actually, I think that's fundamentally the reason why the police department has allowed their management, first responders to take vehicles home. Across the rest of the organization, there is a handful of people who have take-home trucks. These are people who are generally on standby assignments in the evenings or on weekends, and essentially come in directly from where they're at to respond.
I understand all that. And I know that we've had this conversation before, but, you know, obviously, difficult times require us to make difficult decisions, and if that means limiting the use of take-home vehicles, and reevaluating who among command staff or who among different departments has them, then we ought to consider that, because I don't know, quite honestly, when we say take-home vehicles, take home could mean Tahunga, just right next to the Glendale border, or it could mean someone who lives 70 miles away. And 70 miles away each way, every day, that's 140 miles being put on a vehicle. Again, small drop in the bucket of the overall fund, but it's about doing what's right and showing that we're trying to do our best.
Yeah, good point, Councilmember Kasakian. And we do, on a regular basis, evaluate those take-home vehicles, and Chief Sid and I will have that conversation again. But for your information, we have adjusted we have reduced the number of take-home vehicles, for example, in building inspection, and they don't use vehicles or carpool vehicles, they use their own, and we just give them a stipend for mileage. So those are the things that we have done and will continue looking into.
Other than a handful of critically essential individuals, I personally don't see the need for anyone to have a take-home vehicle. That's just my take.
Yep.
And yeah, I want to echo that, just so you're hearing it from more than one of us. I would like to see some kind of an analysis of how they're being used, how often people have had these emergency call-ins, or are they just kind of the regular commute vehicle that somebody is using every day? If it's a matter of, you know, you want it there for that rare occasion, I don't know. I mean, does it really have to be the vehicle that's being used daily to commute? I do have concerns about that.
And again, Mr. Brotman, members of City Council, as Mr. Takhtalian mentioned, outside public safety, there are no take-home vehicles for commuting purposes. It's for folks who are on standby, for emergencies, and it's really for sake of efficiency. In case of an emergency, someone drives in their own vehicle, they have to go and put the necessary tools in a truck, make sure it's available. So that's the reason for these standby vehicles. Other than that, nobody's using it for commuting to work back home.
I understand, it may all be justified. I think like a deeper analysis would be helpful. Councilmember Asatryan.
I raised this during the staff briefing yesterday, but I would like for us to get a public briefing on the actual fund. If you're requesting that this money be transferred over, I would prefer that we have the numbers in front of us,
Yes.
which would include what Councilmember Kasakian and Mayor Brotman brought up as well. And so I don't know which session that would be plugged into, but I think it would be pretty easy for you guys to both bring that report of how many cars. You know, I posed the question of who's paying for the gas. It's not just the car that's being taken home, for example. But I would like an accounting of this fund and why we would need to put it there. The first thing that pops in my mind is, you know, for years, for as long as I can remember, every election cycle, candidates and, you know, future council members have talked about getting a big park in South Glendale. This fund could be going to that. I know that we have a separate fund for that, but what we have in that fund is never going to be enough for us to actually realize having a big park in South Glendale, for example. And I'm pretty sure that everybody else on the dais has different projects they're bringing up, but if this is what you need, then I think we need better accounting.
Yes, most definitely, Mayor Brotman, Mayor City Council. We have the detail, but we'll share it at a different study session for your edification. What we've done in the past, during the budget study session, these questions and requests come up from council members, and we have a wrap-up session to make sure that we have responded to all of your questions. But all of these information is available. Nothing is done in vacuum. There are a lot of analysis that goes into coming up with these requests.
Yeah, I would support that. Let us know what we're talking about here, whether it's a Hyundai Ioniq that's being driven 20 miles or a fire engine that costs probably over $1 million, just so we know, you know, when we talk about, we're all looking for savings here, but, you know, what do they say? We're not sure that the squeeze is worth the juice on this sort of thing. Just so we're sort of speaking, you know, hypothetically here. If we see what it is, I think we can have a much better discussion as to savings and need for certain.
Fair enough, I understood.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that closes out our fiscal 22-23 budget at this point, and I'll go ahead and dive into the 5-year forecast, which will set the stage for our proposed 23-24 budget. This forecast is really the starting point of our 5-year forecast, essentially similar to what we gave the council last year. The revenue forecasts are based on a variety of factors, as you would imagine. Use of consultants when appropriate, historical trending, current economic conditions. We do work closely with each department as needed. As you can see, the ARPA money is gone after 23-24. This is our last installment, $20.4 million. There is a deadline to commit those funds by December of 2024. In regards to sales tax, while we have certainly recovered from the pandemic and we've had really good growth, for 23-24 we are forecasting a flat growth. It's not negative, but no growth for 23-24, and then very conservative 2 years growth in the out years. Property tax is very conservative as well. I should note in the revenue forecast there is a dip in between 24-25 and 25-26. That is due to the closure of the Shoal Canyon landfill, about $8 million in the general fund that has been adjusted out of the revenue forecast. Overall, fairly conservative revenue growth of about 2.4%. On the expenditure side, again, very conservative in regards to our labor cost. We have two things in 23-24. That is all the previously negotiated MOU that we've negotiated with the unions. And as you will see in the upcoming study sessions, we are asking for 6 positions in the general fund, 3 sworn positions in the fire department, and 3 positions in the police department, 1 sworn and 2 non-sworn. And we will go through that as we go through the departmental presentations. Other than that, there is very, very small increases in the appropriations for step increases and salary adjustments, and there are no other staff increases factored in. Overall expenses increase a very modest 1.6%. And as you can see, while the fund balance dips below 25% starting in 26-27, these deficits in and of themselves are somewhat manageable. I mean, we could go year by year and balance the general fund, and that's essentially what we've been doing. But as you're going to see in the next couple of slides, we can no longer afford to do that. At this point, I'm going to start presenting some other costs that we should take into account in order really to have a more complete look at what our general fund would reasonably look like or could look like in the near future. The first item we need to address is the continued shoring up of our internal service funds. As we propose surplus money in 22-23 to move to fleet, we need to continue to do that, not only for our fleet fund, but our building maintenance fund. Similar to the fleet fund, we've deferred maintenance on our facilities, and we can no longer afford to do that. For 23-24, we are proposing $5.8 million, of which 4 would go to fleet and $1.8 million to our building maintenance fund, and then $2.8 million a year in the out years, $2 million to fleet, and $800,000 to our building maintenance. Adding this in.
Question, Jason,
yes.
sorry. On the 1.8 million for facilities, are you going to be letting us know what facilities, like is the fire department, I know wants, their facilities updated, renovated, et cetera. Will that be included in your report?
Councilmember Devine, members of the council, absolutely. We will be presenting in the future study sessions details on where these funds will be going for 23-24 and the out years. So adding this in lowers our fund balance below 25% in fiscal year 25-26 as opposed to 26-27. The next item does have a significant impact on our fund balance, and that is additional labor costs. The MOUs for all 4 bargaining groups in the general fund, that's GCA, GMA, GFFA, GPOA, they all set to expire June 30th, 2024, meaning any new labor agreement would take effect in fiscal year 24-25. And what these numbers represent, it is a placeholder. It's a little bit of everything from COLAs, potential adds of staff, salary adjustments based on market surveys. Certainly what we are seeing, what other agencies are doing, we do need to factor something into our forecast. I should note this is a placeholder. Everything in regards to salary and benefits with our labor groups is subject to meet and confer as part of the negotiation process, but we do have to factor something in for our future labor costs. And as you can see, the reserves go well below 15% in 25-26, and just about fully expended in 26-27, and negative in 27-28. And lastly, we do need to start considering funding for capital improvement. Many years ago, believe it or not, we used to put 50% of our sales tax into our CIP over the years. And again, a little bit of a recurring theme, but to balance our general fund budget, we've slowly whittled away and reduced it to the point where there's really minimal funding in our CIP program. This year, we had $30 million CIP requests. We proposed to fund $8.6 million of these requests in 23-24, and then basically start funding it to the tune of $10 million per year. And we will certainly go through these projects in upcoming study sessions.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, member of City Council, this goes back to the point that I made, the emphasis I made, that although infrastructure didn't make it to next year fiscal year's bucket of priorities for council, this is, and we know that's has been a priority for council, so that's why we are setting aside almost $50 million over the next 5 years towards infrastructure. And Councilmember Devine, improvements to fire stations that you mentioned will fall into this category.
So, at this point, our only available resource to us is Measure S. So starting for fiscal year 23-24, we are proposing to incorporate all of our remaining unallocated Measure S into the general fund. The first year, that 31.5 million is really two pieces. We had a leftover of about 16.5 million of unallocated Measure S, and then we have another 15 million that is sales tax to be received in the current year that hasn't been allocated. If you see at the top of the screen where it says Measure S, that 18.5, 14.2, et cetera, that's all previously approved quality of life programming that remains intact. And the other point I want to make is in regards to Measure S is council has approved 107 million in projects. Roughly half is for affordable housing. That's all fully funded and fully accounted for. This piece at the bottom of the slide is really the Measure S dollars that have not been accounted for, and we were proposing to put that into the general fund budget.
Again, Mr. Mayor, City Council, housing is the current fiscal year's priority. With over $50 million that this council has allocated for affordable housing for projects, and it doesn't mean that we're going to take our foot off the gas. We have been looking, and we will update you on a couple of other projects, but essentially it goes to say that although, again, housing didn't make it to your new list of priorities, there's still a lot of work to be done, and council has done a tremendous job of setting aside over $50 million towards affordable housing, which is unprecedented.
So as you can see on the slide, adding this additional piece in certainly improves our picture. Still not structurally balanced, but the reserves are not depleted, and we would not dip below 25% until fiscal year 26-27. And lastly, we have planned a drawdown of our Section 115 trust. This was basically our plan at the time it was created. This will help us manage our PERS obligations in the general fund. We do believe it's going to peak in 32, 33, 33, 34. So this essentially tries to flatten out that curve or that peak. We think we'll have about 40 million in the fund by 25, 26, and we will start drawing it down over the course of the next 6 to 7 years. And of course, doing so improves our fund balance, as we would be just below 20% in 26, 27, and just below 16% for 27, 28.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, as an outcome of the Pension Review Committee's recommendation, council had directed staff to come up with a plan for 115 trust, and this goes along in response to that direction.
So that concludes the 5-year forecast. I will just summarize the 23-24 general fund proposed budget.
Are there any other questions on the 5-year forecast?
If I may, I brought this up at the briefing as well, but I think in the future sessions, one of the sessions should include a potential list of revenues that we've talked about as council members, as if staff have any recommendations, because for me, this doesn't include potential revenue streams if we get creative, whether it's the public-private partnerships with EV chargers to city-owned parking lots and leasing of that, to the digital signage, for example, that's coming up. I think it would be helpful for us to have a bird's eye view of these potential revenue streams and what we need to do as a council to set certain priorities and policies in order to be able to generate that revenue.
Yeah, great point, Councilmember Satrian. There is a list put forward by council, as you mentioned, as well as staff have come up with a number of items. However, it'd be premature to plug in a number because it's going to require some research. And as part of that, we can definitely share that list with council, and you can give us direction as to which areas, which items to focus on, as opposed to a long list of 12, 14 items. That then will, and that's my plan, to put a team together to look into these potential revenue sources. And after their research and, pros and cons, we'll bring an item for discussion with council. And moving forward, then we'll be able to plug in some numbers as potential revenues. Without that information, it will be just grabbing a number out of the air, and my esteemed finance department staff will shake in their boots if we did that without justification or backup material.
I'm not looking for that. I actually think, given that we have fiscal responsibility and economic development as the two areas of priority for the coming year, perhaps during that time, as we're talking about policies, you guys can bring back a list. We can go through them and figure out maybe we add those things to the list for it to come to council as a group.
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I would just second that. I think it is important. I mean, I haven't said anything about the Measure S. I'm kind of holding off on that. I am not that comfortable folding it into the general fund, since although I guess from a statutory perspective, it doesn't have to be kept separate, but I think we've been operating that way. I think the public has some expectation that it will be separate and used for kind of specific quality of life projects. I know how staff feels about it, but I just want to point out that, I'm not there yet on the Measure S thing, and I would like to look at additional revenues, and perhaps there's a way we can not have to take that step of folding it into the general fund. So now for this coming, I mean, I know for the out years we can always do what we need to do, but for this coming year, I see you have 31 million that you're kind of banking on to, in the budget. That brings us to an ending reserve that's pretty high. So what if we were to pull that 31.5 out? Where would we end? Maybe that's in the slide up above. What would be our ending reserve for this coming fiscal year if we did not touch Measure S?
Mayor Robin, members of the council, if I can do some quick math, it's roughly around 85 million, which would be a reserve percentage of about
25?
Slide 25.
about 25%.
About 25%?
27 point, Mayor Brotman, members of council, will be about 27.1%, which is slide 25. If you just go back 2 slides, that doesn't factor in that additional revenue. So you'd be about 85 million in ending reserve and at 27.1%.
Okay, which is still above our floor, and still probably higher than most cities in our neighborhood. I'd like to kind of keep that as a TBD, to be decided. I could see your consternation, but let's,
Mayor
Just wanted to say
Brotman,
that.
if I may, the way that the 5-year forecast is built, it relies on previous balances to build up to where we
Right.
need to be. So if we do that, then this would be the true depiction of where we would be in 27, 28, we'd be at negative 23.4%. So that's the only hesitation, is that we build a forecast building up a certain level of fund balance to get us through the next 5 years in a positive state.
I understand, but that's where new revenues can come in.
Exactly.
Again, new revenues, Mr. Mayor, not going to be an immediate $31 million.
Like a business tax or a bicycle tax or something? I
I
don't
don't know
think
about the
any of us,
bicycle tax, but,
I don't think any of us want taxes.
but I think I think we need, everything has to be on the table, you
We
know?
completely agree, Mr. Mayor. Again, as Ms. Asayan mentioned, we were trying to smooth out the future years and not just look at an individual year as we have done in the past. We have reached this critical point that we really need to have a structurally balanced budget for the outer years, not just to look at one year and I've told staff, rob Peter to pay Paul. We can't afford to do that any longer. And as far as Measure S is concerned, the intention is not to use these funds to pay for salaries and benefits, whether it's in a separate bucket or line item or goes into the general fund. It will pay for essential, what we have left after all the cutbacks now is all essential services. It will pay for those and quality of life programs, quality of life projects. And we can certainly keep track of them differently, but they all go towards the same goal of maintaining or improving the quality of life of our residents and businesses and providing the services that we do on a day in and day out basis. But point taken, yeah, and everything's on the table, including potential sources of revenues. There may be some disagreement as to the sources, as well as, to be honest, we need to look at tightening our belts and look at saving some of our expenses throughout every single department if possible.
So I will, this is just a summary of our 23-24 proposed budget. As you can see, there's really two big ticket items. It's the Measure S revenue folded in at $50 million, and that's the $34 million we expect to receive in 23-24, and then our $16 million of our unallocated fund balance. And the other comment I was going to make, we do have our transfer from the utility going up $2.4 million. We transfer about 10% of the revenues. GWP will be coming to the council very, very shortly with ACOSA. We do expect our operating revenues go up. So even if we hold the rate at 10%, we do expect the transfer to increase about $2.4 million. This will give us a total proposed revenue estimate of about $337.4 million. And on the salary side, again, as I indicated in the 5-year forecast for 23-24, we've got in the salaries the MOU. Well, we've already previously negotiated in our MOUs with our labor groups, as well as we are asking for 6 positions, 3 sworn in fire, and 3 in PD, 1 sworn, 2 non-sworn. And then you can see the other big ticket item is the transfers out at $16 million, and that is the $5.8 million to our internal service funds and the $8.6 million to CIP, for a total 23-24 proposed budget of $313.6 million. And that is we factor that into our beginning reserve, and our projected reserve is $116.5 million at 37.5%. And with that does conclude my presentation.
Before we go to calendar, any other questions, Mr. Mayor? members of the
Let me go
council?
around and see, do any of my colleagues have kind of wrap-up questions or comments?
I have just a
Councilmember Najarian.
wrap-up question. Jason, way back when we look at our revenue, what's that, slide 14? Yeah, are we not anticipating an increase in property taxes?
Not for this fiscal year. We are in our forecast conservative about 3% starting in 23-24. Based on what we are getting from our consultants, even though interest rates are have gone up, it hasn't necessarily impacted the market value of the properties. Certainly, it has slowed down to the point, but nothing where we're going to see negative property tax growth, such as the last recession.
Yeah, I'm looking at it the other way. I mean, any realtor will tell you that it's still a very strong market.
Correct.
So are we sort of being conservative on that with some good news when the receipts come in, or are we playing it it straight?
We're generally are conservative, but our consultants are generally conservative as well. But I can assure you our revenue estimates are on point with what we're being told by our property tax consultants in this market. So I would not expect huge revisions to our estimates at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Devine? Councilmember Satrian?
No.
What you-
Can you go back to the 7.8 mil? And then let me find the slide.
Like 19?
No, there was another one where.
You need some
So,
time? I could-
Yeah,
okay.
but if you want to go on. yes.
Councilmember Kasakian, you have any general comments, or?
No, my general comments are just to wait and see where our discussions take us. Obviously, we have some very important decisions ahead of us to make as a council. We need to figure out our overall approach as to how to continue funding our city operations. And as I've said this before, I think of all the meetings that we have, these are the most important ones that the community should be watching, that our unions, our labor groups should be watching, because we make these decisions and then a few months later, everyone has their hand in the till and wants to ask for more of this or that. So, yeah, I'll have questions moving forward. And obviously, I think there are some things that are going to cost us some money that maybe staff has not anticipated. But overall, I don't have anything else to add at this moment, Mayor Brotman. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Satrian?
So I found it on slide 18. If you remember, so you have 4.6 million allocated for the inflation relief and stipend. And at that time, staff had presented that's what we're projecting the surplus would be. That's only a couple of months ago. How do we end up with an additional 7.8 in just a few months?
Councilmember Satri, members of the council. So this inflation relief and stipend was actually prior year's surplus that was carried over into our fund balance. So we would be, if the revised budget came to fruition, we'd be using that fund balance and we would be drawing it down. But as you see in the revenue projections and expenditure projections, we have 15.4 million combined between the additional revenue we're going to get and the budget savings. So essentially, we don't need to draw down on the 4.6 million. So that comes out of that 15.4 million.
So
But that doesn't answer my question.
So Councilmember Assatrine, that 4.6 million is not the current year's, it's not 22, 23 estimated fund balance. They're two different things. One's prior year and one's the current year. So the 7.8, the reason how we're ending up there is we're factoring in prior use of fund balance of $4.6 million. We're factoring that in. So they're different year projections is the answer.
Okay, that's not how I remember the conversation. I know it was done during a closed session, but, so maybe, I don't know what I can discuss here today, but maybe I can have the conversation with staff.
I think it's fair to say that the $4.6 million is how we ended last year.
Yes, it's
And that was
21,
the
20.
$4.6 million surplus that was identified and used to pay the stipends from last year's remaining funds. 7.8 would be something different. They're apples and oranges.
Because the expense happened in 22, 23, that's why you're seeing that 4.6 on this slide. And that's why it's reducing the surplus for this year by 4.6, but it's essentially in fund balance waiting to be used for a better explanation. So that's what that is.
In order to make the payment, we had to appropriate the money in as a carryover, as council approved it in 22-23, and the resource to fund it is the fund balance of the 4.6 million from 21-22.
Does that make sense?
It does, but that's not how I remember it.
Oh.
So I'm just gonna, we'll have a separate conversation.
And Mayor Brotman, I do want to add one more thing, just so staff is not caught flat-footed. Normally, if I don't say much during these meetings, it's because I try to have conversations with staff offline and get my questions answered. But I do want to prepare everyone and just say, for a number of years, at least myself and perhaps some of my colleagues have asked that we look into having staff for council members. It has come up at various times in various ways, and it's going to be a cost, and I don't think it's going to be an exorbitant cost in comparison to the grand scheme of the overall budget. But how council operates, the responsibilities that we have, the demands on us in terms of being responsive have evolved and changed to a point where I think it's appropriate, especially when we see that other cities have staff available to them. The city of Carson comes to mind, the city of Pasadena comes to mind. And it's not, I think, a great or heavy ask, yet, I think year after year it's ignored. And I think that now should be the time for staff to seriously, our staff and who's bringing this budget forward, to anticipate and expect for us to ask for staff for council members and come up with a method of how we can implement that and integrate it into our everyday and city operations.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Devine.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of broad statements, just that I think we all have to remember that quality of life issues are very important. Those are major concerns of ours, and I think we have to make sure that we address those in our budget. And also, I think the reserve is very important, and we have to protect that in any way that we can, even if it's a little distasteful to some of us. But I've been at conferences where cities have mentioned that their reserve is down to 1 or 2%, and it was a kind of a dicey situation. So I hope that we will continue to safeguard our reserve funds. Thank you.
And I just want to say one more thing, which is on the question of revenues. The public has a lot of asks of us. They want safer streets, they want a clean environment, they want more parks, affordable housing, faster approval of permits, more code enforcement, right? There's and these things are all important. We all want to support them. They cost money. So I think nobody likes to talk about revenues, especially when you get into the details about what they might be. But I think we have to be courageous, and we have to be honest. And I think we're going to have to look at that. And I think we can justify it if at the same time we're tightening our belt as much as possible without disrupting services. So I think that we have to just move forward with realism. So I wanted to just say that, and we do have a caller. So I would like to let Mr. Milano speak. Herbert Milano, 3 minutes.
Sure. Herbert Milano, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mayor Bodman, members of the City Council. As many of you know, I have been following the budgets for many years, and it has always been with a level of concern with regard to the trends in the costs. So the City Council is going to be exploring new avenues of revenue, which normally takes the form of either thinking about a parcel tax or increasing rates and moving the money over to the general fund, or other sources of revenues like Measure S, which meant additional sales tax primarily borne by those individuals who are actually buying more of a percentage of their income, which means it hits the lower income families hardest. If you're going to look at all of the issues and they are open to discussion, then tightening your belts should really be part of this conversation. If you were to take a trend line of the last 20 years, based upon let's say, the cost of labor or the average salary for a particular position, as a comparison to the average family income in Glendale, put those two charts above, I would bet that you will find a much higher and exponential growth in the compensation figures relative to the income of the public. And if you don't have a comparison like that, then you'll be making decisions about additional revenues that is impacting the public very hard. If we are going to consider additional revenues and not consider the fact that you have about 14% of the population basically well below the poverty line, then it is not fair for the public. If you don't consider the fact that the depreciations of the city's assets have to be considered with the capital expenditures, right? That's a corresponding amount that should match the depreciation that takes place every year. Then you're going to find out why, if we're not putting the money into those basic services that the city residents expect, parks and roads, up quality of life. This is what you were elected to provide for us or maintain for us. And so if that money is not going there, then where is it going? Well, I think most of you know where it is going. It is the impact of the CalPERS investments that whenever they lose money, the city has to pay out the difference. And if you don't look at it that clearly and face it, that is the item that is not being confronted and that needs to be looked at. If CalPERS continues to lose money in their investments and we have to come up with additional funds to meet it, then we're all working primarily for CalPERS. I suggest that we take a very hard look at our labor negotiations and that the employees take a look at how this is impacting our
Herbert
basic
Milano,
services.
you're out of time. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. If there are no further questions or calls, what is next? Adjournment, right? Okay. I'm sorry.
Mayor, Brotman, members of the council, I just don't know if you wanted me to just do the budget calendar and just recap the what's coming
Okay,
next.
please.
Let's do that for the public's
Could
benefit
get
too.
our city clerk to, I can't seem to advance the slides remotely. Thank you. Okay, so upcoming next Tuesday, May 2nd, that's our quality of life departments. You'll see presentations from regarding community service and parks, community development, library, arts, and culture. Next session would be session 3.
Sorry, Mr. Bradford, we also mentioned, Mr. Mayor, Mayor City Council, that we'll cover the work plan items for 23-24.
Would you need more time for that, given our discussion today and what we're looking for?
Councilmember
Do you wanna move
Sajian, no,
that
I
to
think that
another-
the information that you requested is readily available.
Okay.
The next study session is Thursday, May 9th. That would be our infrastructure. That will be Public Works and GWP. Session 4 is Public Safety. That's Tuesday, May 11th for Fire and Police. Session 5 on Thursday, May 18th is all of our central support departments, attorney, clerk, city treasurer, human resources, finance, information technology, and the city manager's office. And Tuesday, May 30th is session number 6. That is where we will take our fees. We've been studying our fees. We are going to give it to council in several sessions because we have so many. And so we're going to make it a little more digestible starting on May 30th. And we will wrap up any outstanding items that come up during the sessions. And then June 13th is our budget hearing and budget adoption.
Okay, thank you. All right. If there are no other comments, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, we're adjourned at 10:39 PM. Thank you. Are you pro tem?